Words cannot express how devastated I was when I heard about this case, how angry I was, how committed my office was to getting justice.
She calls on me for everything. I don't know whose body it is. I don't know whose body would be in the house.
This is Candace Craig, sitting inside a police interrogation room, being asked by detectives about her missing 71-year-old mother. And in that same room, her mother's body is already bagged up in pieces in the basement of the house they shared. And before the end of that day, Candace's daughter will tell the police everything that happened to her grandma.
She grilled Grandma's rib cage. She had it in the dining room.
But before we get into all that, we need to go back to where this whole thing started, because this story does not begin with a murder. It began with an old woman named Margaret, who spent her whole life working hard and taking care of the people around her, and who ended up putting all her trust in the one person who should never have had it. Margaret Elizabeth Craig was 71 years old and had lived for years in the same small house on Hill Road in the Landover area of Prince George's County, Maryland. The house was modest, about 1,200 square feet with 4 bedrooms, and she shared it with her adult daughter Candace and Candace's children. Her family called her Auntie Joyce, and by every account, she was the kind of woman who held a household together even when that household was draining everything out of her. She had survived multiple strokes and had real problems moving around on her own. She needed daily medicine, help with drawing out her colostomy bag every single morning, and general help with the basic things that most people take for granted. Her whole world had gotten smaller and smaller over time, down to just a few rooms and a phone she used to stay in touch with family. And the person she depended on for everything was Candace, her own daughter, who had been officially named her caregiver. She called her a hard-working woman who gave everything she had over a lifetime of work. She had retired and lived off a pension and Social Security money, which is how a lot of older people survive once they stop working. That money, as small as it was what kept the whole house going, and Candace had been quietly stealing out of that for months. Candace Raquel Craig was 44 years old at the time of the crime and had been living in her mother's house for years along with her 3 daughters. She was officially Margaret's caregiver, meaning she was the person responsible for making sure her mother was fed, medicated, and taken care of day to day. But Candace was not doing any of that. She was not fulfilling her duties as a caregiver, but was using her access to her mother's money to take care of herself. Candace had no verified employment and had access to her mother's bank accounts, credit cards, pension payments, and her Social Security checks, and she had been helping herself to all of it without Margaret's permission for a long time before things finally came to a head. The charges on Margaret's accounts were things Margaret would never have used on her own. DoorDash orders, Lyft rides, all kinds of purchases that made 0 sense for a woman who could barely get across the room without help. Celia Margaret Hardy was Candace's oldest daughter and Margaret's granddaughter. She was 19 years old at the time and also lived in that Hill Road house. Celia had documented learning disabilities and developmental issues that made her easy for people to influence, and the person who had been influencing her whole life was her mother, Candace. That background matters a lot for understanding why Celia did what she did when things got bad, and we will get to that. Margaret figured out something was wrong with her money and called her bank herself to report it. And this is where things get really hard to wrap your head around, because both Margaret and Candace were calling the same bank about the same account at the same time. Margaret was calling to say someone was stealing from her. Candace was calling and pretending to be Margaret to approve the exact same transactions her mother was reporting as theft. What Candace did not know was that every single one of those calls was being recorded and kept on file. At some point, Margaret connected the dots and realized it was her own daughter doing this to her, and on May 23, 2023, she told Candace directly that she was done and was going to the police. That was the moment everything changed. Margaret threatened to report Candace to police for using her credit card without permission, and Candace attacked her inside her own bedroom and killed her. The exact way Margaret was killed was never confirmed because of what Candace did to the body over the days that followed, but we know that by the end of May 23rd, Margaret was dead, and Celia was home that day. She was in the basement when she heard her grandmother scream from somewhere else in the house.
But she always screamed, like when she used to fall and stuff, she would always scream. So, and I asked my mother, what is that? She said that the boyfriend didn't have something over because all I heard was a scream.
Candace told Celia that something had fallen and told her not to go into her grandmother's room. But she also said something else to Celia that same night, something that showed she was already thinking ahead. She told her daughter that if she ended up going to jail, to take care of her two younger sisters. The next day, May 24th, Celia was alone in the house and eventually went to her grandmother's room. She found Margaret's body inside a blue plastic storage bin with a trash bag over her head. There was blood on the carpet. Candace had already cut out the bloodiest parts of the carpet and taken them to throw away in a dumpster at a nearby IHOP. When Candace got back and found out Celia had gone in the room anyway, she was angry, but she still wouldn't tell her daughter what had actually happened to Margaret. What she did instead was tell Celia what they were going to do about it. They needed to get rid of the body to destroy any DNA evidence, and the choices were to use acid to dissolve the body, burn the body, or cut it up. The two of them went to Home Depot and bought charcoal, a lighter stick, and a red gas can, then stopped at a gas station to fill the can with gasoline. They came home, set up a fire in the backyard, put portions of Margaret's remains on the grill and lit it up. And then, to cover the smell of what was burning, Candace cooked chicken on that same grill.
They even had like a little table with one of the umbrellas. They had that out there. They had the grill. And then they had, the charcoal.
A neighbor looked over and saw what seemed like two people having a normal cookout in the backyard. But then the fire got out of control and spread wider than they planned, and neighbors came over to help put it out with water before calling the fire department.
It was kind of suspicious because Memorial Day, they had their grill further down from the house. From the house. Usually have their barbecues close to the house. That kind of got suspicious. I didn't see nobody at the grill, nobody bringing anything out to the grill, so I didn't pay much more attention to it.
They had one of those barrel type grills.
Yes.
And they had the charcoal sitting beside, and then they had like a little table with the umbrella.
The remains that did not burn that night were left outside to cool down overnight. The morning of May 25th, Candace and Celia went back outside, picked up whatever was left from the night before, and brought it back into the house. At some point before this, Candace had already ordered a chainsaw from Amazon and had it delivered to the house. She placed the order using Margaret's name, even though Margaret had already been dead for 2 days by the time the order went through. Down in the basement of that Hill Road house, Candace used that chainsaw to cut her mother's body into pieces. Celia testified that she could hear the chainsaw running and could smell what was happening. She got sick and vomited. When she came back, her grandmother's body had already been cut apart on the basement floor.
The jury, quote, "Mom showed me Grandma's skull and said, 'This is the hard part, right here.'"
The pieces were put into multiple plastic trash bags and left in the basement. Candace and Celia then just kept living in that house for the next 10 days, going about their regular lives, with Margaret's remains sitting in bags in the basement below them. Margaret's nephew, David Wilson, had been in regular contact with her through Facebook Messenger, checking in about the news and just regular family talk. When several days went by without hearing from her, he got worried. He went by the house, noticed her car was still in the driveway, and got strange responses from Candace whenever he asked about his aunt. He also noticed a large burned area in the trees in the backyard. Something was not right, and he knew it, so he called the police to do a welfare check. On June 2nd, 2023, just before 2 in the afternoon, Prince George's County police officers arrived at the 200 block of Hill Road. Candace answered the door and let them in. The officers did not even make it far into the house before the smell hit them. The odor of decomposition was so strong they noticed it immediately, and when they got to the basement, they found blood and body tissue on the floor near 3 white plastic trash bags. One of the bags was open, and what was visible inside appeared to be brain matter. There was a knife on the floor, a chainsaw cover, cutting tools, cleaning supplies, and blood all over the walls and floor of the basement. When the officers asked Candace where her mother was, she told them Margaret habitually ran away. That was the story Candace was going with, standing there in a house that smelled like death with bags of human remains in the basement below them. The homicide unit took over the scene, and the police took Candace and Celia into separate rooms for questioning. Both sessions were recorded on camera, and watching those recordings makes it very clear why neither story held up for long. During Candace's interview, while trying to explain away her mother being gone, Candace actually volunteered to the detective that she controlled Margaret's Capital One bank account and that she was the one who had made all the recent transactions on it. She just offered that information on her own, like it was completely normal, like it needed no explanation at all. The detective did not push her on it right away. He let her keep talking and building her story. Meanwhile, in a different room, Celia was sitting with her phone going through her Amazon account and found the chainsaw order placed in her grandmother's name on a day when Margaret had already been dead for 2 days. She found it herself and told the detective about it herself without being asked.
I was looking at my Amazon orders, and I saw she ordered a chainsaw. On what day was this? I gotta look back on the orders. Was it this week though? Yeah, it was this week. I know she ordered a chainsaw, and I was asking like, what is it for? She didn't really tell me.
The forensic team also confirmed that based on the condition of the remains, the body had been dead for at least 2 to 4 days before it was found on June 2nd. That timeline completely destroyed Celia's initial story that Margaret had still been alive on the Tuesday morning before the welfare check. The detective laid that timeline out directly to Celia, and at that moment she stopped trying to hold up the story her mother gave her and started telling the truth about what actually happened.
Yes, Candace Craig is accused in the murder of her own mother, Margaret Craig, last spring. Prosecutors in the case say she tried to dismember her mother with a chainsaw and burn her remains on a charcoal grill. Again, we do want to warn you before we get into more details of this story that some of them are incredibly graphic. We heard today, though, from the granddaughter in this case, Celia Hardy, now 21 years old. She did not have the chance to finish her testimony in court today, but the details she was able to give the jury incredibly graphic, saying back on May 23rd of last year, she heard her grandmother scream. Later that day, her mother told her not to go into grandma's room. The next day, that's where Hardy says she found her grandmother dead in a blue storage bin with a bag over her head and blood on the carpet nearby. Hardy says after that, her mother Candace Craig told her they had to get rid of the DNA, either using acid, burning the body, or chopping her up. Days later, she says they bought fire and grilling supplies at Home Depot before going home, turning on the grill and cooking chicken to cover up the smell of Margaret Craig's burning body in the woods out back. The fire started to spread and neighbors grew concerned. The fire department was called, but when they got there, the fire was already out. And when that didn't work, she says they brought the grandmother back into the home, and that's when her mother ordered a chainsaw on Amazon. When it got there, she says her mother used that to split her grandma into dozens of pieces. She says when she smelled something bad and realized what her mother was doing, she became sick and vomited.
On June 3rd, 2023, the day after the welfare check, both women were formally charged. Candace was charged with first-degree murder and second-degree murder. Celia was charged with accessory after the fact, meaning she did not commit the murder herself but helped cover it up afterward. Both were taken into custody and held without bond. From that point forward, Celia cooperated fully with investigators and gave detailed statements about everything that had happened from May 23rd through June 2nd, and those statements became the foundation of the case against her mother. Candace Craig's jury trial started on October 24, 2024, in Prince George's County Circuit Court in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. 8 days in front of a jury, with Judge Karen Mason running the courtroom. The charges were first-degree murder, second-degree murder, tampering with evidence, and disposing of a body in a place that was not allowed. The defense didn't even try to fight the last 2 charges. They admitted Candace was involved in what happened to the body and focused everything they had on trying to create doubt about whether she was the one who actually killed Margaret. They pointed to unidentified male DNA at the scene as a possible alternative explanation, and they brought up a man named Benny who they described as a live-in boyfriend and drug dealer who lived in the house and supposedly knew nothing. They even showed the jury a PowerPoint presentation they literally titled Reasonable Doubt. They also tried to go after Salia's credibility during cross-examination by pointing out that she had made a deal with prosecutors and was testifying in exchange for a reduced sentence on her own charges. But Salia's testimony was not the kind that falls apart when someone starts pressing. She sat on that stand in an orange jail jumpsuit, completely calm and matter-of-fact, and took the jury through every detail of those 10 days without contradicting herself once. When someone asked her why she helped cover everything up, she gave them 3 words: "Because my mother asked me." On October 30th, Maryland Assistant Medical Examiner Dr. Pamela Ferreira took the stand and told the jury that this was a unique case.
So the medical examiner really called this a, quote, unique case simply because the victim in this case, her body was not intact by the time it arrived to the medical examiner's office. In fact, the medical examiner testified that the body was in 9 bags, to be specific, and she said that there was 67 fragments of remains that were examined. Bottom line, as you know, with these medical examiners and these autopsies, you typically find out whether it was blunt force trauma, a shooting, a stabbing, something that led to this death. She says that she did not determine any of that. There was no evidence of natural disease that caused his death, so ultimately it was ruled a homicide by undetermined causes.
Every single one of those pieces showed signs of both burning and being cut by a mechanical saw. Not every part of Margaret's body was ever found, and because the remains were so badly damaged, Dr. Ferreira could not say with certainty exactly how Margaret was killed, whether it was a stabbing, strangulation, or something else. But she was clear about what she could say. There was no evidence that a natural disease killed the victim. The official finding was homicide by undetermined means. That ruling by itself knocked out the entire defense theory of an accidental or natural death. Then came the financial evidence, and this part is what really tied everything together for the jury. University of Maryland students from a program called the Justice for Fraud Victims Project, working under a lecturer named Samuel Handwerker, spent 30 hours going through bank records and call recordings and produced a 48-page financial report that was brought in as evidence at trial. They matched specific withdrawals from Margaret's accounts to deposits in Candace's accounts, identified what the money was spent on purchase by purchase, and went through recordings of both women calling the same bank about the same account, one reporting theft and one approving the exact transactions being flagged as stolen. After the murder, there were transactions at Home Depot for $126 that were tracked and linked directly to the supplies used in the cover-up: trash bags, paper towels, and a drop cloth. And Candace kept trying to pull money from Margaret's accounts even after Margaret was dead, because she needed people to think her mother was still alive and still collecting benefits. Assistant State's Attorney Julia Hall said the students' work brought it home for the jurors. After 3 hours of closing arguments, the jury took just over 1 hour to deliberate before coming back with guilty verdicts on every single count. On February 20th, 2025, Judge Karen Mason gave Candace Craig life in prison with no possibility of ever getting out. "This is something so unimaginable," Judge Mason said in court. "What we have here is a woman who led a good life and left this world in such a way, and only you know, Miss Craig, exactly what happened here." Assistant State's Attorney Shauna Coleman told the courtroom that what Candace did happens in movies and books, not in real life, and that it was beyond the realm of words. She said she was not even going to walk through the details of what was done to Margaret's body because she wanted the court to remember Margaret as the person she actually was, not as what her daughter reduced her to. State Attorney Aisha Braveboy called the whole thing unthinkable and horrendous and said Candace should have been taking care of her 71-year-old mother, but instead heartlessly took her life because of a dispute over fraudulent credit card charges.
This was a case of a mother who was also a grandmother who was senselessly killed by her daughter, her own daughter. And in court this week, you heard testimony from Candace Craig's own daughters, who, in 2 cases, she had accused of being responsible for this crime. Words cannot express how devastated I was when I heard about this case, how angry I was, how committed my office was to getting justice.
She said the life sentence with no parole was fully appropriate, and she stood by it completely. Candace Craig is in the Maryland Department of Corrections right now. She will die there. Salia Hardy's outcome was very different. In December of 2024, Judge Karen Mason sentenced her to time already served, roughly 550 days she had already spent in jail, plus 5 years of supervised probation. She was released from custody shortly after the sentencing hearing. The judge and prosecutors both pointed to Salia's learning disabilities and developmental issues as a major factor in how they treated her case. She had not been part of the actual killing. She had been manipulated by her mother her whole life. She cooperated fully with investigators from the start, and her testimony at trial was what secured the conviction. In light of the trauma and unfortunate circumstances Miss Hardy has faced because of her mother's crime, our prayers go out to her as she heals and works to regain her life, State Attorney Aisha Braveboy said. Judge Mason closed out the sentencing by telling Salia directly to make her life something her grandmother would have been proud of, to turn everything she went through into something meaningful. What Salia's whole story tells you is that the damage Candace did in that house was not something that started on the night of May 23rd. It had been built into the foundation of that family for years. The same control that put a chainsaw in her 19-year-old daughter's hands in that basement is the same thing that eventually put Salia on a witness stand, telling a jury the whole truth about her mother. What part of this case stood out to you as the most horrendous? Let me know in the comments section. Also, click on one of the cards on your screen to see more videos like this. See you in the next one.